Why was it that, in a room full of men, her presence seemed almost invisible? The others leaned over maps and intel sheets, their voices low but decisive. She stood at the edge of the table, clipboard in hand, her medical inventory checked 3 times over, precise down to the last bandage. No one asked her opinion. No one noticed her silent efficiency. To them, she was simply the medic, the bandage carrier, the one who would patch holes after bullets had already done their work. But Becky Morgan had grown used to that silence. 6 months at Outpost Viper had trained her well. She listened, she observed, she prepared, and she never complained. Because sometimes being underestimated was safer than being seen. Still it burned. Later in the medical tent, the noise of the briefing replaced by the buzzing of flies and the low hum of a generator, she arranged her supplies with a precision that would have seemed obsessive to anyone else. Gauze, clamps, tourniquets, each in its proper place. Everything ordered, sterile, controlled, unlike the rest of the outpost, which seemed held together by rust, duct tape, and stubborn willpower. On the wall beside her cot hung a worn photograph. An elderly man in hunting gear stood beside a much younger version of Becky on a misty Maine ridge. His rifle rested casually in the crook of his arm, his face carved with lines of experience and something else resolve. His eyes matched hers, sharp, searching, unflinching. That look, more than the rifle, was what tied them together. "Doc, got a minute?" She turned. Specialist stood in the doorway, his arm wrapped clumsily in a stained field dressing. A fresh gash peeked from beneath the gauze. "What happened this time?" Becky asked, already reaching for her kit. "Concertina wire on perimeter duty," he muttered, wincing as she peeled back the bandage. The wound was messy but manageable. She worked quickly, her hands steady, her motions efficient. Studied her with curiosity, like he always did when she worked. "You've got steady hands, Doc. Ever handle a weapon with that kind of precision?" Her fingers froze for half a second before resuming. The pause was so brief most wouldn't have noticed. "I know enough to qualify," she said evenly. "But my job is putting soldiers back together, not taking enemies apart." Nodded, letting it go. But his words lingered in the air long after he left, because what he didn't know was that her hands remembered more than just stitching. They remembered calculations, angles, wind drift. They remembered the metallic press of a trigger. That night when the outpost quieted under the shadow of the Hindu Kush Mountains, Becky sat outside her tent with a small leather-bound journal on her lap. To anyone passing by, it looked like medical notes. In truth, it was filled with calculations, elevation adjustments, wind speeds, ballistic trajectories. Each page a quiet map of violence, drawn not from training exercises, but from the bullet wounds she had stitched closed over the past months. She flipped to the back, running her thumb across the initials embossed into the leather. H.M. Harold Morgan, her grandfather, the man who had taught her everything she wasn't supposed to know. She whispered into the night, soft enough that no one else could hear. "I hope I never have to break my promise." But the mountains loomed like watchful sentinels, indifferent to promises, heavy with secrets of their own. The smell of pine and wet earth returned to her in memory, as vivid as the present moment. She was 8 years old again, following Harold through the dense Maine woods. Each step he placed with deliberate care, as if the forest itself was listening. "Remember, little bird," he whispered. That was his name for her. "The forest has 1,000 eyes and ears. To move among them, you must become part of them." She had crouched with him in the clearing, binoculars pressed to her small face as he taught her not just to look, but to see. To notice the broken twig that didn't belong. To hear the alarm call of a bird that warned of a predator. To read the forest like others read books. By 12, she could hit targets that made seasoned hunters shake their heads. By 15, she calculated bullet drop and wind drift without hesitation. By 16, Harold had shown her a hidden world beneath an abandoned family gas station, a Cold War bunker, walls lined with maps and weapons. a place where shadows gathered in service of missions that never made it to history books. He told her about Blood Hawk. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it had been the silent hand preventing disasters that would have torn the world apart. He had trained her because he saw something rare, the Morgan eye. But he also made her promise, use this gift to protect, never to harm. And she had believed him. Until the day the flag-draped coffin came home. She had sat in the front pew of the church, her black dress soaked at the hem from the walk through rain-slicked grass. Her mother's grip crushed her hand as the chaplain's words echoed hollowly. Harold Hawk Morgan, civilian contractor, dead in an unspecified incident. That was all the government had offered, but Becky knew better. She had received his coded message 3 weeks earlier. His last operation. His last stand. At the funeral, a stranger placed a brass cartridge in her hand, a .338 Magnum, inscribed with words only she would understand, shoot in the space between heartbeats. That cartridge still hung around her neck now, hidden under her uniform, a secret weight against her chest. She thought of it as the helicopters thundered overhead, ferrying men to and from missions that might never be remembered. Tomorrow would be another. Operation Iron Serpent. A simple infiltration, they said. A village sweep. Confirm a high-value target. Extract an aid worker if possible. But she knew better than to trust simple. In the command tent, Colonel studied maps with his usual falcon-like stare. When she entered with her clipboard, he looked up, and for a moment she swore he saw straight through her. "All operational elements are cleared, sir," she reported. "Extra trauma kits prepared. Terrain will complicate evacuation." Nodded, but his eyes lingered on her a second too long. Then he asked the question no one else had ever asked. "Do you still have the cartridge?" For a heartbeat, the air in the tent felt heavy. Slowly, Becky reached beneath her collar and pulled it into the light. Gaze softened, just for an instant. "He said you'd know what to do with it." She swallowed hard. I'm doing it now." Studied her in silence before finally nodding. "Then keep your eyes open tomorrow. You see things others don't." Becky returned to her tent that night unable to sleep. Because if knew, what else did he know? About Harold, about Blood Hawk, about Crimson Crown, the mercenaries Harold had warned her about in his final letter. She lay awake listening to the distant howl of wind across the mountains, and when morning finally came, she rose with her gear ready, her pack precise, her weapon qualified but unremarkable, her secret still hidden. For now, because tomorrow, when the mission began, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had spent years suppressing was about to be forced into the open. Why was her heart steady when everyone else seemed to pound like a drum? The pre-dawn darkness at Outpost Viper was heavy, almost suffocating. Soldiers moved with hushed efficiency, checking gear, slinging rifles, adjusting optics. The smell of aviation fuel from the helipad mixed with the sharp bite of mountain air. Becky sat on her cot, a small lead light clamped between her teeth, making final adjustments to her medical pack. Gauze rolls, syringes, IV kits, chest seals, each checked, each placed with ruthless precision. Her hands didn't tremble, they never did. That was part of the problem. A soft tap on the tent flap. "Doc, you awake?" Sergeant Martinez stepped in, a veteran with scars on his face and the calm of a man who had survived too many firefights to count. He glanced around before closing the flap behind him. "I heard about the range last night," he said quietly. Becky's stomach knotted. Word had traveled faster than she'd hoped. "Standard qualification," she replied evenly, not looking up. "Standard," he smirked. "I've seen standard. What you pulled during that mortar blast, wasn't it? 3 shots, perfect grouping, while everyone else hit the dirt." Becky said nothing, just kept folding bandages. Martinez reached into his pocket and pulled out a small coin, worn and scratched from years of being carried. He pressed it into her palm. One side bore the insignia of his old unit. The other was crudely etched with a caduceus, the medical symbol. "Made it myself," he muttered. "You saved me 2 months ago when shrapnel tore me up. Everyone thought I was done, but you were. This coin, it's a reminder. You're one of us, Doc, whether you admit it or not." Her throat tightened. Challenge coins weren't given lightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Martinez leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Wilson knows. He won't report you, but he'll be watching. And something about this mission doesn't smell right. Keep your eyes open." He left before she could respond. The coin sat heavy in her palm, another weight to join the brass cartridge hanging at her chest. By the time she stepped outside, the sky was lightening at the edges, faint streaks of pink stretching across the jagged ridges. The helicopters loomed like dark beasts on the landing zone, rotors idling, blades chopping the air with a steady rhythm. Operators filed in, strapped, focused, eyes already narrowed to the task ahead. Lieutenant Wilson stood near Alpha Team, his posture taut, his gaze scanning everything. When his eyes met hers across the dust, there was no accusation, only an unspoken message. "I know, and I'm waiting." The briefing was short. His voice carried over the noise of the rotors. Target village 2 kilometers northeast. High-value Taliban commander believed in residence. Possible American hostage. 2 teams. Alpha approaches from the south, Bravo blocks the north. Rules are standard, minimal civilian risk, priority on extraction. One last note, recent intel suggests specialized opposition. Stay sharp. His eyes flicked toward Becky just for a fraction of a second. She caught it. So did Wilson. Moments later, they lifted into the air. Becky sat near the open door, wind tearing at her hair under the helmet, the mountains rushing past below. She closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing. In hold, out hold, finding the pause between heartbeats. Wilson's voice came over the headset. "Snipers use that trick too." She opened her eyes. He wasn't accusing her. He was acknowledging her. The helicopter dropped them into a clearing 2 kilometers from the target. Dust and vegetation whipped in all directions. The team fanned out instantly, rifles raised, perimeter secured. Becky followed, medical pack bouncing against her back, steps silent, precise. 2 hours later, Alpha Team reached a rocky outcropping overlooking the village. Wilson crouched, scanning through high-powered binoculars, then passed them to her. Central building, metal roof, anything stand out? She adjusted the focus. At first, it was ordinary. Then she noticed the discoloration along the roof's edge, a strip of wear inconsistent with natural weather. "Observation post," she said without hesitation. "Someone been lying there watching." Wilson's lips tightened. Exactly what else? She scanned further. The footpaths cutting into the northern ridge were too uniform, too deliberate. Movement patterns, disciplined, professional, not villagers. Wilson gave her a look that was part test, part respect. Not bad for a medic. Before she could answer, Martinez hissed from nearby. "Boss found something." They crawled to his position. A discarded wrapper lay in the dust. Becky picked it up, her stomach sinking. Cyrillic lettering, Russian military rations, recent production. "Not Taliban," she said quietly. Martinez raised an eyebrow. "How the hell would you know that?" She ignored the question, scanning the terrain again. "This whole village is a trap." Wilson's gaze sharpened. "Recommendations." Becky hesitated. Speaking the truth meant exposing what she was, but keeping silent might mean sending these men into an ambush. "Approach from the east," she said finally. "Dry riverbed. It's difficult terrain, but it's the only angle not covered by kill zones." Wilson didn't hesitate. "Martinez, radio colonel, tell Bravo to reposition to the north ridge." Martinez moved to transmit, but his radio spat static. "Comms are jammed." The words dropped like a stone. Wilson's jaw tightened. "Then we're not dealing with Taliban. This is professional." Before Becky could respond, the first shot came. A whisper more than a crack. The point man dropped instantly. blood spreading across his chest where the round had slipped through the tiny gap between his plates. "Sniper," Wilson shouted. "Northern Ridge." Gunfire erupted, dust and rocks splintered. The men scrambled for cover. Becky was already moving, crawling toward the fallen soldier. Blood pooled fast, too fast. The round had shredded a lung. "I need to get to him," she yelled. "Too exposed," Wilson snapped. Another shot rang out, chipping stone inches from her face. Whoever was on that ridge wasn't just targeting the team. He was targeting her. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed calm. The wounded soldier gasped, choking on blood. Every second she waited, he slipped closer to death. But every second she moved, she risked her own. Her eyes fell to the rifle lying beside him. An M110 sniper system, optic glinting in the harsh Afghan sun. She froze. Her grandfather's voice whispered from memory. Sometimes the greatest protection comes from eliminating the threat. Her throat tightened. 5 years she had avoided this. 5 years she had been just a medic. But now, Wilson's voice cut through the chaos. "Morgan, we need those skills or we're dead." Time slowed. The smell of blood, dust, and cordite. The dying man before her. The enemy unseen but precise. The brass cartridge pressed cold against her chest. She reached for the rifle. The weight settled against her shoulder like an old memory. Her breathing slowed. In, hold. Out, hold. Her heartbeat found that familiar pause. The world narrowed into the glass of the scope. And there, 847 meters out, a faint shimmer of light where shadow shouldn't be. The sniper's hide, invisible to anyone else. She adjusted for wind, for angle, for breath. And in the space between heartbeats, she squeezed. The rifle cracked, the figure jerked, the position went still. One shot, one life, one promise broken. But it wasn't over. Her instincts screamed. There would be more. Crimson Crown never worked alone. "Second shooter," she called, "east outcropping." Wilson didn't ask how she knew. The men shifted. Becky was already aligning her second shot. 923 meters. A longer distance, but her eye made the math instinctively. Another squeeze. Another body crumpled. Martinez cursed under his breath. "Holy hell, Doc." She wasn't finished. Third shooter, West Ridge, moving to secondary position. Wilson stared at her. "How can you?" "Because it's what I do," she cut him off. She tracked a faint shadow between rocks. Distance, 1,000 meters. Wind shift right to left. She calculated an impossible angle. She fired. The bullet struck stone first, ricocheted, and found its target. Silence fell, broken only by the team's ragged breaths. Martinez whispered, almost reverent, "You just banked a sniper shot." Wilson's eyes locked on hers. Awe, suspicion, and something else, fear. That isn't taught in medical school. Becky lowered the rifle, the moment slipping away, replaced by the sight of the bleeding soldier gasping for life. She dropped the weapon, crawling forward with hands that shifted from hunter to healer in an instant. "I need to decompress his chest," she barked, already pulling tools from her pack. Her hands worked fast, efficient. A needle hissed into place. The soldier's breathing eased. Martinez knelt beside her, eyes wide. "Never seen anyone go from sniper to surgeon that fast. Who the hell are you really?" Becky didn't look up. "Right now, I'm the one keeping him alive." But inside, something cracked wide open. The medic was gone. The sniper had returned. And there was no way to hide it anymore. Why hadn't anyone said a word? The silence inside the ravine felt heavier than the gunfire they had just escaped. Dust still clung to their uniforms, the echo of Becky's impossible shots lingering in the air. The wounded operator was alive, stabilized under her hands, but no one looked at him. Every set of eyes kept straying back to her. To the medic who had just revealed she wasn't just a medic. Wilson was the first to break the silence. His tone was calm, but sharp enough to cut through the mountain wind. That kind of shooting isn't taught at Fort Sam Houston. Becky didn't look up from her patient. Her voice was level, quiet. I never said it was. Martinez shifted uncomfortably, muttered under his breath. The team wasn't used to surprises, and certainly not from the woman they dismissed as background noise for 6 months. Wilson crouched beside her, his face close enough that his words couldn't be mistaken for anything but private. 3 shots, 3 kills. One of them a ricochet. That's not instinct. That's training no medic should have. So who are you really? Becky tightened the tourniquet, refusing to meet his eyes. Right now, I'm the person trying to save life. That's all you need to know. Wilson studied her for a long beat, then gave a curt nod. But the question hung in the air between them, unanswered, like smoke that refused to clear. Above, the sky split with the low thump of distant rotors. Becky tilted her head, listening. Her chest tightened. Not American, too deep, too heavy, Me-17s, Russian birds. They'll have reinforcements inbound, she warned. Wilson didn't ask how she knew. He didn't have to. The team shifted into motion, guided now by unspoken urgency. They carried carefully, navigating the jagged rocks. Dust rose around their boots. Every sound felt amplified, the clink of gear, the rasp of breath, the faint static of jammed radios. They reached a fork in the ravine. North led back toward their planned extraction. South narrowed into shadows. North is faster, urged. North is obvious, Becky countered. If they're Crimson Crown, they'll be waiting. Wilson's eyes flicked between the roots, then to her. Options. Becky scanned the walls, the water staining, the shape of the stone. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The earth leaves clues if you know how to read them. South, she said. There's a cave system. It'll bypass their perimeter. Wilson hesitated, then nodded. South it is, move. They pressed into the narrowing passage. At first it seemed like a mistake, the rock pressed tight, stretcher scraping against stone. But then Becky found it, a fissure hidden in shadow, just wide enough for a man to slip through sideways. How the hell did you know this was here? Muttered. Becky's hand brushed the stone, cold and rough under her palm. Pattern recognition. Inside, the air was cool, damp. There cast thin beams against limestone walls. The cave twisted, branched, threatened to swallow them. But Becky guided them with quiet certainty. Right turn where the water ran deeper, left where the air smelled fresher. After 20 minutes, they emerged into a small box canyon. The sun blazed overhead, the sky impossibly blue. For a moment, it felt like freedom. Then Martinez's voice shattered it. Movement north ridge. Becky scrambled to higher ground, scope pressed to her eye. Through the glass, dark figures moved with lethal precision. Not Taliban, not amateurs, professional soldiers, disciplined and deliberate. 12 hostiles, coordinated, pincer formation. Wilson cursed under his breath. They're tightening the noose. The men set up defensive positions. Dust clung to their sweat-damp faces, rifles steady but eyes wary. Groaned on the stretcher, his life hanging by a thread. Extraction in 20, asked, his voice betraying a tremor. Not if the sky belongs to them, Becky murmured. As if summoned by her words, the sound of another helicopter echoed through the canyon. Not the heavy thump of Me-17s. This was higher-pitched, sharper. A gunship. Becky's stomach sank. She knew that sound too well. Attack helicopter incoming. Modified civilian frame, armed for direct action. Wilson looked at her like he'd already accepted the impossible. Can you hit it? Her throat went dry. She thought of her promise, of Harold's voice, of the brass cartridge pressing against her skin, shoot in the space between heartbeats. Yes, she said, but I'll need a clear line. Martinez laid down suppressive fire as Becky crawled to a ledge. She set the rifle, adjusted her breathing, and waited. The helicopter swept into view, black, sleek, deadly. Sunlight glinted off its nose cannon. She calculated the angle, the wind, the rotor's spin. She remembered Harold's lesson: every machine has a weakness. She found it the junction where the rotor met the transmission, vulnerable, fragile. Her breath slowed. Her finger squeezed. The first shot hit. The helicopter lurched violently, smoke pouring from its top. She fired again, striking the engine. Flames burst, the gunship spiraled, and then it crashed against the far ridge in a violent plume of fire. The canyon fell silent. "Jesus," Martinez whispered. "She just dropped a bird with a sniper rifle." Swore under his breath. Even Wilson's iron control cracked, off flickering across his face. That shouldn't even be possible. Becky lowered the rifle, her pulse steady, but her insides churned. Every promise she had made lay shattered among the rocks. The radio on her chest hissed suddenly, not with static but with clarity. "Morgan, this is Viper Actual. Authentication confirmed. Extraction inbound 30 minutes, hold position." Colonel's voice, on a frequency that should have been jammed. Wilson turned to her, eyes sharp. "That wasn't standard comms. What did you just use?" Becky said nothing. She couldn't. Because the truth was as dangerous as the men closing in around them. The canyon walls echoed with distant shouts. Crimson Crown was on the move, their containment tightening. Becky's gaze swept the ridges, every angle, every line of approach. Her voice came low, steady. "They're coming." And this time she knew survival wouldn't just depend on her skills as a medic, or even as a sniper. It would depend on something harder: trust. Trust from men who had just discovered she wasn't who they thought she was. Trust from a commander who now knew her secret. Trust she hadn't yet earned. The first mortar round landed, shaking the ground under their boots. Dust rained from the canyon walls. The enemy was ready to finish what they had started. Wilson's voice rang out, steady but grim. "Positions, hold until extraction." Becky set the rifle against her shoulder once more. Her breath slowed. The world narrowed. And she whispered the words she had sworn never to need again. In the space between heartbeats, the war for survival had begun. Why did the ground always shake before the mind could catch up? The first mortar slammed into the canyon floor, sending shards of stone flying like shrapnel. The concussion rattled teeth, stole breath, collapsed the fragile quiet. Dust and smoke choked the air. The canyon, once their shelter, had become their trap. "Cover, find cover," Wilson's voice cut through the thunder. Operators scattered, each man moving with muscle memory born of too many firefights. Becky dropped behind a jagged rock shelf, her hands already moving to check the wounded. His chest still rose, ragged but steady. For now. But another hit close enough and no amount of medicine would matter. A second round landed closer. The canyon floor erupted, showering them in fragments. Becky tasted grit, iron, and something more familiar: fear. Not her own. The fear of the men around her. Fear of being outmaneuvered, outnumbered. Her fingers found the brass cartridge beneath her armor. She whispered to it like a prayer, in the space between heartbeats. "Doc," Martinez shouted over the chaos. "North Ridge, they're setting up a firing line." She snatched her rifle, pressed her cheek to the scope. Through the haze she spotted them, 3 silhouettes moving in practiced formation, dragging heavy packs into position. Mortar team, professionals. Her chest tightened. Without hesitation she aimed, exhaled, and squeezed. The first man dropped. She shifted instantly, the second fell. The third tried to drag the tube into cover, but her round found him before he could steady it. Silence from the ridge, then cheers from behind her. "Hell of a shot, Doc," yelled. But Becky didn't feel pride, just a deep, gnawing unease. Each life she ended pulled her further from the promise she had sworn on her grandfather's grave. Each pull of the trigger carried weight medicine could never erase. She lowered the rifle, forcing herself to check again. His pulse thudded weakly against her fingers. She adjusted the IV, whispered reassurance even though he was unconscious. Stay with me. You don't get to go yet. Another barrage rained down, this time from the east ridge. Rocks exploded. One operator screamed as shrapnel ripped into his leg. Becky sprinted low, sliding into cover beside him. Blood gushed bright through shredded fabric. Femoral artery. Seconds to live. Her mind shifted, the sniper gone, the medic returned. Tourniquet high and tight. Clamp. Pressure. Her hands moved faster than thought, precise, practiced. "You're not dying today," she growled, forcing the words past clenched teeth. The operator's breath steadied, pain evident but life preserved. And then another whisper crack. A bullet sparked inches from her head. Sniper. She dropped instinctively, dragging the wounded man into deeper cover. Wilson's voice came through the radio. "Morgan, can you find him?" Her heart lurched. Medic or sniper, savior or executioner, the roles twisted, impossible to separate. She raised the scope, scanned. The canyon seemed empty, but the Morgan eye saw what others couldn't. A shadow that moved against the grain. A branch bent unnaturally. A glint too deliberate. "West Ridge, 70 meters below the outcrop," she called. Wilson didn't question. "Take him." Her throat closed. She thought of Harold, of his promise, of her vow to never cross this line again. But the bleeding man beside her reminded her of reality. If she didn't shoot, he would. Her breath steadied, she squeezed. The sniper collapsed. The canyon erupted again, this time with gunfire. Crimson Crown had abandoned subtlety. They poured down from the ridges in coordinated assault waves. Automatic fire shredded the canyon floor, forcing the team deeper into scattered pockets of cover. Becky dragged the wounded man to Martinez, then took her place on the ledge again. Her scope danced from target to target, every pull of the trigger both salvation and betrayal. She killed to save. She saved to justify killing. The loop twisted until she couldn't tell where it began. Wilson crawled up beside her, his face grim. "We can't hold this forever." "Extraction, Ada?" she asked. He shook his head. 15 if we last that long." Becky's eyes swept the canyon. Every ridge burned with muzzle flashes. Smoke curled into the sky. Her stomach twisted with the sick recognition. Crimson Crown wasn't just attacking. They were testing her. Whoever commanded them knew what she was, and they were forcing her to show it. Her radio crackled again, his voice threading through the static. "Hold your position, Morgan. Reinforcements inbound. 30 mics." 30 too long. "We won't survive that," she muttered. Wilson caught it. Suggestions. Her gaze locked on the eastern slope where the enemy pressed hardest. "They're funneling us, herding us into a kill box." "And you know how," Wilson pressed. "Because it's what I do." For the first time, he didn't flinch at her honesty. He just nodded. "Then break their pattern." Becky's pulse steadied. The Morgan eye mapped the canyon in grids, angles, elevations, lines of fire. She saw it like her grandfather had taught her, a chessboard of life and death. "They're anchoring their advance with a heavy gun team on the north slope," she said. "Kill them, the whole line falters." Wilson relayed orders. Suppressive fire lit up the ridge. Becky crawled to a new vantage point, ignoring the scrape of stone against her knees. Her scope found the team, 2 gunners, 1 loader. The machine gun's barrel glowed red. Her shot cracked and the loader fell. Another squeeze, the gunner dropped. Martinez's rounds cut down the last. The canyon shifted instantly. Crimson Crown's advance stuttered. For a breath, Alpha Team could breathe. Then the air filled with the distant roar of engines. Becky's stomach sank again. Vehicles, armored, closing fast. "This isn't an ambush," she whispered. "It's an execution." Wilson's hand gripped her shoulder. His eyes burned into hers. "Not if you keep doing what you're doing." Her chest ached. She wanted to scream at him, at all of them, that she wasn't this. That she was supposed to save, not kill. But another explosion shook the ground and the choice vanished. She was both. She had to be both. Martinez slid in beside her, grinning through the soot smeared across his face. Hell of a sniper for a medic. Becky didn't smile. She couldn't. No, just a medic who shoots when she has to. His grin faded. He understood. The assault resumed, heavier, closer. Becky's rifle cracked again and again, each shot a razor's edge between guilt and necessity. She patched wounds in frantic bursts, hands slick with blood, then lifted the rifle to protect the very men she had just saved. The line blurred until she couldn't tell which role came first anymore. Finally, over the chaos, the blessed sound came, rotors thundering. Extraction. Birds inbound, shouted. The team pouring fire into the ridges to cover the landing zone. The first helicopter dropped into the canyon, spitting fire into Crimson Crown positions. The second swept overhead, suppressing with brutal efficiency. Move, move, Wilson barked. They carried first, then the wounded. Martinez laid covering fire as Becky provided overwatch, every shot a desperate plea to the universe. Just let them make it. She was last to move, sprinting for the... A bullet cracked past her cheek, hot wind grazing skin. Martinez's arm yanked her inside as the helicopter lifted. The canyon shrank beneath them, filled with smoke, blood, and unanswered questions. Becky collapsed into her seat, chest heaving. Her rifle lay across her lap, her hands sticky with both blood and gun oil. Around her, the operators stared, silent, shaken. Not because they doubted her, but because they had seen something that shouldn't have been possible. Wilson leaned close, voice barely audible over the rotors. When we land, you and I are going to have a very long conversation. She didn't answer. She just stared down at the cartridge pressed against her chest. The words etched into its brass echoed louder than the gunfire still ringing in her ears. Shoot in the space between heartbeats. She had over and over, and somewhere between those heartbeats, she had lost the promise she once thought unbreakable. Why was the silence after combat sometimes worse than the firefight itself? The helicopter thudded across the endless ridges, its cabin filled with the stink of sweat, gunpowder, and blood. No one spoke. The wounded moaned faintly, unconscious but alive. Becky sat against the cold metal wall, rifle across her knees, eyes locked on the brass cartridge swinging against her chest. Every breath felt like borrowed time. When the finally touched down at Outpost Viper, medics rushed forward, lifting and the other injured operators onto stretchers. Becky followed, but Wilson's hand clamped onto her arm. His grip was iron. Not you. Command wants a word. His eyes said the rest, and so do I. She let herself be led to the command tent. The air inside was cooler, heavy with the faint whine of electronics. Colonel stood over a map table, his back rigid, hands clasped behind him. He didn't look up as they entered. Reports, he ordered. Wilson stepped forward, his voice clipped. Enemy contact confirmed, professional adversaries, coordinated, likely private military, not insurgent. We sustained 3 wounded, 0 KIAs. Extraction achieved under heavy fire. And Morgan. Becky felt Wilson's gaze cut sideways at her. Eyes finally lifted. The weight of them pinned her in place. She's not what she claims, Wilson continued. I saw it. 3 snipers neutralized at over 800 meters. 1 ricochet kill. She downed a helicopter with small arms fire. That's not battlefield luck. That's training, specialized training. Silence stretched, then softly, dismissed, Lieutenant. Wilson stiffened. Sir, with respect. Dismissed. Tone brooked no argument. Wilson's jaw flexed. He glanced at Becky once more, frustration and something close to betrayal flashing in his eyes, then saluted sharply and left. The tent was quiet again, just Becky and... He studied her for a long moment, then he spoke. I served with your grandfather. Her chest seized. She tried to mask it, but her voice cracked anyway. You knew Harold. Nodded slowly. Knew him, trusted him, fought beside him in places that don't exist on any map. He saved my life more than once. He also taught me one of the hardest truths in this business. Becky swallowed. What truth? That sometimes the only way to save life is to take it. She couldn't meet his eyes. I promised him I'd never follow that path. And yet here you are, said softly. The tent seemed to close in on her, the weight of expectation pressing from all sides. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. I came here to heal, to stop the bleeding, not to add to it. His gaze softened. And yet you just kept a dozen men alive because you broke your promise. You think they'll forget that? Becky shook her head, struggling to breathe past the tightness in her chest. Every shot felt like I was burying him all over again. For the first time, his composure faltered. He stepped closer, his voice lower, quieter. Do you know why Harold trained you? She forced herself to look up, because he saw something in me. More than that, eyes burned with memory, because he knew Crimson Crown wouldn't stop, because he knew one day the fight would find you. He wanted you to be ready. Her heart thudded painfully. Crimson Crown killed him, didn't they? Didn't answer directly. His silence was confirmation enough. Becky's chest ached as though the mortar blast had finally caught her. All those years of silence, all the unanswered questions, all the half-truths, they converged into this single, brutal reality. He said I should protect, not destroy, she whispered. And you did, replied firmly. Today you protected. Don't confuse the method with the meaning. But Becky wasn't convinced. The image of every man she had killed in the canyon burned in her mind. She could still smell the smoke, feel the recoil, hear the breath cut short. Straightened, his tone sharpening. From now on, you're under my direct orders. You'll stay with Alpha. You'll fight when I tell you to fight, and you'll heal when I tell you to heal. Understood? Her hands trembled. And if I refuse? Then you put every man here at risk, said flatly, and you dishonor Harold's memory. The words hit harder than any bullet. She wanted to scream, to throw the rifle back at him, to demand he see her as more than a weapon, but she saw something in his eyes, not manipulation, not exploitation, a quiet, haunted understanding. He had carried the same burden once. Becky lowered her head. Understood. Good, said. Get some rest, you'll need it. She walked out of the tent into the cool night air. The outpost buzzed with post-battle tension. Men moved quickly, repairing defenses, checking weapons, carrying the wounded. But when she passed, conversation stilled. Eyes followed. Some filled with gratitude, some with awe, others with suspicion. To them, she wasn't just the medic anymore. She was something else, something they couldn't name yet. Back in her tent, she dropped onto the cot, staring at the ceiling. Her hands shook as if they no longer belonged to her. She thought of alive because she had fought. She thought of the sniper whose eyes she had met through the scope, just for a breath before she ended him. She thought of Harold's voice, fading into the dark, protect, don't destroy. She whispered into the emptiness, am I protecting you, Granddad, or betraying you? The only answer was the whine of distant generators and the low murmur of men who would never forget what they had seen her do. Her dreams were jagged that night. Smoke, fire, Harold's coffin draped in a flag, crimson crowned faces blurred in shadow, the sound of her rifle cracking over and over. She woke drenched in sweat, hands clutching at the cartridge around her neck as though it might anchor her to something real. Morning came harsh, the sun blazing white across the mountains. Wilson was waiting outside her tent, arms crossed, jaw tight. We need to talk, he said. Becky nodded, bracing herself. They walked to the perimeter, away from listening ears. The dust crunched under their boots. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Wilson turned to her, eyes sharp. Who the hell are you? Her throat tightened. I told you I'm the medic. He stepped closer, voice hard. Don't insult me. I saw you hit shots no one in this unit could make. I saw you read that canyon like a damn textbook. That isn't luck. That isn't instinct. That's years of training. So either you tell me the truth or I report what I know." Becky's chest burned. The words hovered on her tongue, heavy with risk. But Wilson wasn't just angry. Beneath his fury there was something else, the same confusion, the same hunger for answers she carried herself. She took a breath. "My grandfather trained me. He was part of something called Blood Hawk, off the books. Silent missions, no recognition. Crimson Crown killed him for it. I swore I'd never use what he taught me. Until yesterday." Wilson stared at her, silent. "You think I want this?" she pressed, voice breaking. "You think I enjoy it? Every shot feels like a part of me dies, but if I don't, we all die. That's the truth." The silence stretched. Wilson's jaw clenched. Then slowly he nodded. "I don't like secrets," he said. "But you saved my men. You saved me. That counts for something." Relief flickered, brief but real. Then he added, almost grudgingly, "Just don't expect me to trust you yet." Becky nodded. "I don't trust myself either." They stood in silence, two soldiers bound not by trust, but by the fragile necessity of survival. Above them the mountains loomed, ancient, unyielding, indifferent. Crimson Crown was still out there, watching, waiting. And Becky knew this was only the beginning. Why did the quiet before dawn always feel more dangerous than gunfire? The outpost was hushed, only the faint hum of generators breaking the stillness. Becky sat on a supply crate near the perimeter, cradling her canteen, staring out at the jagged mountains that had already swallowed too many lives. Her fingers absently rolled the brass cartridge on its chain. Sleep hadn't come. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes she saw them, the men she'd killed in the canyon, the helicopter spiraling in flames. Her grandfather's voice pressed in like a ghost. "Protect, don't destroy." But hadn't she already crossed too far? Approached Wilson. He didn't bother clearing his throat this time, just sat beside her, shoulders tense. "You didn't sleep," he said, not a question. "Neither did you," she replied softly. They sat in silence for a while. The air was sharp with cold. Becky pulled her jacket, but the chill wasn't from the wind. It was the way the mountains seemed to hold their breath. Wilson finally spoke. "Intel came in last night. Crimson Crown has a local cell. They're not pulling back. They're preparing." Becky's stomach tightened. "Preparing for what?" "Something bigger than the canyon. They want to make a statement." His eyes slid to her. "And they know you're here." She froze. "How?" Wilson's jaw clenched. "That's the question, isn't it?" Before she could answer, the alarm klaxon split the morning. Shouts erupted across the outpost. Men scrambled to positions. Becky and Wilson sprinted toward the comms tent, adrenaline burning away the fog of exhaustion. Inside, Colonel stood grim-faced over a monitor. The feed showed static at first, then resolved into a grainy video. A man in combat gear sat before the camera. His face was obscured, but his voice carried cold clarity. "To the American command. You faced us in the canyon. You know now we are not insurgents. We are Crimson Crown. We are the war you pretend doesn't exist." The camera panned. A figure was dragged into view, an American pilot, bruised, bloodied, bound to a chair. His eyes were swollen, nearly shut, but his voice cracked as he spoke. "Help me, please." The masked man silenced him with a backhand. Then he looked back into the camera. "Send us the one you hide. The one you call Morgan. Send her and maybe this man lives." The feed cut to black. Silence gripped the room. The operators shifted uneasily. Becky felt the air leave her lungs. "They know me," she whispered. His jaw was iron. "They've known you since the canyon. This proves it." Wilson's eyes were sharp. "They don't just want to kill you. They want to use you." Becky's chest ached. Crimson Crown wasn't just fighting. They were hunting her. "I'll go," she said, the words out before she could stop them. Wilson snapped his head toward her. "The hell you will." His voice was steel. "Absolutely not. That's an execution. You step outside this wire alone, you don't come back. Becky gripped the cartridge around her neck. And if I do, that pilot dies. Her voice broke on the last word. She saw Harold's coffin again, draped in a flag. She couldn't watch another family go through that if she could stop it. Wilson's hand slammed the table. This is exactly what they want, to pull you into their trap. They're baiting you, Morgan. Don't play their game. His gaze was unreadable. We're not handing her over, but we also don't abandon our people. He looked at Becky. We're going after him together. An hour later, Alpha Team was on the move. The sun blazed across the ridges, the sky a perfect blue that mocked the tension in their bones. Becky checked her pack again, bandages, IV kits, morphine, and her rifle. The weight of both was unbearable but necessary. They moved fast, low, through a dry riverbed. Wilson led, his eyes scanning constantly. Martinez followed, muttering under his breath like a prayer. Becky stayed near the center, every step heavy with dread. 2 kilometers out, Martinez raised a fist. Movement. Becky dropped to one knee, rifle up. Through her scope, she spotted them. Crimson-crowned scouts, disciplined, scanning, armed to the teeth. She tracked their patterns. Too wide for patrol, too tight for random search. They're guarding, she whispered, not patrolling the pilot's clothes. Wilson nodded. Martinez, flank right, Becky with me. They crept forward. The landscape narrowed into a ravine, not unlike the one from the canyon, but steeper, shadows swallowing the light. At the far end, half-collapsed stone buildings clung to the slope. Smoke curled from one. Safe house, Wilson muttered. They slipped closer, each step careful, deliberate, but Becky's instincts screamed. The silence was wrong, too quiet, too controlled. Her heart thudded. She pressed herself against the wall of the ravine, whispering, "It's a kill zone." Wilson frowned. "Explain." She pointed the angles of the ruins, the high ground above, the cleared approach. "They want us funneled in. They want me funneled in." As if to prove her right, gunfire erupted. Bullets tore into the dirt around them. The ruins lit up with muzzle flashes. Martinez and returned fire from the flank, shouting into comms. Multiple contacts, heavy resistance. Wilson cursed, dragging Becky deeper into cover. "You called it, so how do we break it?" Her throat tightened. Her instincts screamed the answer, the one she'd tried to bury. "I take the high ground." Wilson's eyes locked onto hers. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he nodded. "Do it." She sprinted along the wall, bullets sparking stone inches from her head. Her lungs burned, legs screaming, but she pushed upward, clawing at the rock face until she pulled herself onto the ridge. The world narrowed into scope and breadth. She found the shooters one by one, their angles clear now. She fired, each shot dropping another. Men who had once been shadows now became ghosts. Her pulse steadied, her guilt screamed. Below, Wilson and Martinez advanced, pushing toward the ruins. Becky's rifle cracked again and again, clearing their path. Finally, the last hostile fell. Silence. Becky dropped from the ridge, rushing to the smoke-filled building. Inside, the air reeked of oil and fear. In the corner, the pilot, alive, barely. She tore off her pack, sliding to his side. His pulse was thready, his skin cold. Bruises darkened every inch of him. "You're safe," she whispered, forcing calm into her voice. "Stay with me, please stay with me." Her hands moved with desperate precision, IV in, fluids running, airway cleared. His chest rose shallow but steady. Alive. Wilson stood in the doorway, covering her. His voice was quiet but sharp. "We don't have long, they'll be back." Becky nodded, fighting the tears that threatened to break her. She had saved him, for now. But as they carried the pilot out, a single thought gnawed at her, louder than the gunfire, louder than the chaos. Crimson Crown hadn't failed. They had made their point. They could reach her, anywhere, anytime. And the next time, they wouldn't settle for bait. Why did survival feel heavier than death? The thumped back into Outpost Viper under a blood-orange sunset, its rotors scattering dust across the compound. The rescued pilot lay strapped to a stretcher, alive but fragile, his faint breaths rattling like brittle glass. Men rushed to unload him, relief etched into their faces. But not all the faces looked relieved. Becky climbed out last, her body aching, her hands stained with both blood and gun oil. Wilson walked beside her, jaw tight, eyes sharp. Around them, whispers spread like wildfire. Some looked at her with gratitude, others with suspicion. And suspicion always traveled faster. Colonel met them on the tarmac. His expression gave nothing away. He lives. Becky nodded, voice raw. For now. His gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. Then he turned. Debrief now. Inside the command tent, the air was thick, suffocating. Maps lay scattered, radios hissed, the hum of generators vibrating underfoot. Wilson stood rigid. Becky sat, her shoulders bowed under invisible weight, paced slowly, his boots deliberate against the metal floor. They wanted you, said finally. Not the pilot, you. Becky stared at her hands. They trembled, even when she curled them into fists. Wilson's voice was hard. And they're not finished. That message wasn't just bait, it was declaration. They're making her the center of this fight. Stopped packing, his eyes locked on Becky. And you need to decide if you're going to run from it or own it. Her throat tightened. I never asked for this. No soldier does, said quietly. Wilson crossed his arms. With respect, sir, this isn't about asking. This is about control. How long before Crimson Crown tries again? How long before they send someone inside these walls? She's a liability. The word hit harder than any bullet. Becky's head snapped up, anger sparking through the exhaustion. You think I wanted them to find me? Wilson's jaw flexed. Doesn't matter what you want. They know who you are. They'll keep coming until one of us breaks. The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Finally broke it. Enough. Morgan isn't a liability. She's the reason any of you are alive. Becky's chest burned. Gratitude from felt like chains. Accusation from Wilson felt like truth. She stood abruptly, voice trembling. I need air. Outside, the compound was alive with motion. Men cleaning weapons, trucks unloading, the dull rhythm of hammers on timber as defenses were reinforced. But Becky walked past it all, through the wire, into the desert's edge. The sky stretched endless above her, stars bleeding into twilight. She sank to the dirt, clutching the cartridge. Her whisper cracked against the wind. Granddad, I don't know if I'm protecting anymore, or if I'm just destroying everything I touch. The mountains gave no answer. A shadow moved behind her. Wilson. His voice was lower now, not sharp, but edged with fatigue. You scare the hell out of me, Morgan. She didn't turn. Because I shoot. Because you do miss. His boots crunched closer. You don't just shoot like a soldier. You shoot like you've done it your whole life. And I can't decide if that makes you our salvation or our executioner. Her chest tightened. She looked at him finally. His eyes weren't angry now. They were searching. You think I want this, she whispered. Every time I pull that trigger, it feels like I'm burying myself with them. But if I stop, people die. What choice do I have? For a moment, he said nothing. Then he crouched, resting his arms on his knees. Then maybe it's not about choice. Maybe it's about balance. She almost laughed, bitter. Balance doesn't exist in war. Maybe not, Wilson admitted. But I saw you in that ruin today. You didn't just kill, you saved him. Both sides, medic and sniper. Maybe that's the balance. You carry both. No one else can. The words pressed deep, but she couldn't let herself believe them. Not yet. Before she could answer, a distant boom split the night. The compound lights flickered. Shouts erupted. Gunfire. Becky and Wilson bolted back through the wire. Smoke curled upward from the motor pool, trucks burning, flames licking the sky. Sirens wailed. Men scrambled to respond. They're inside, someone shouted. Crimson Crown had slipped past the perimeter. silent, unseen, until it was too late. Becky grabbed her rifle, adrenaline flooding every vein. She and Wilson sprinted toward the chaos. Figures moved in the smoke, too disciplined to be random insurgents, too precise to be anything but them. Bullets cracked. One operator fell screaming. Another was dragged into cover. Becky dropped to a knee, scope up, breath steady. She fired one hostile down, then another. Wilson shouted over the gunfire, "They're targeting the comms." She swung her scope, spotting them, charges strapped to their vests, moving with lethal intent toward the tower. Her pulse steadied. She squeezed and the lead man fell. Another, but one slipped through. The explosion ripped the night open. The comms tower crumpled in a storm of fire and steel. Radios screamed static, then silence. Chaos deepened. Men shouted, cut off, confused. Crimson Crown pressed harder, their formation like a knife carving through the outpost. Becky fought from the shadows, every shot dropping another, her heart splitting with each kill. Martinez stumbled into view, blood streaking his arm. "They're not trying to take us out, they're crippling us. Isolation first." His voice bellowed through the smoke. "Hold the line, do not let them breach the command tent." Becky moved instinctively, sprinting with Wilson to cover the heart of the outpost. Her rifle cracked, her hands tore open bandages, her world spinning between saving and killing until she no longer knew where one ended. At last, the attackers began to break. Their leader whistled sharply, and the remaining men, as suddenly as they had appeared, fatting into the night with ghost-like precision. The compound smoldered, vehicles burned. The comms tower lay in twisted ruin. Blood stained the dirt. Becky stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving, hands trembling. Around her, the men looked hollow, stunned. Crimson Crown hadn't come to win. They had come to remind them that walls meant nothing. Stormed toward her, his face carved in stone. "This is escalation. They won't stop until they have you, Morgan." Wilson's eyes locked on hers, "Or until you stop them." The weight of the words pressed down like the desert night. Becky clutched the cartridge, its edges biting her palm. She wanted to believe she could choose differently, that she could still be the healer Harold wanted her to be. But in the smoke and silence of Outpost Viper, she felt the truth settle in her bones. She was no longer choosing. War was choosing for her. Why was the end always quieter than the beginning? The desert lay still in the early hours, smoke still curling faintly from the wreckage of Outpost Viper. Men worked in silence, repairing defenses, counting ammunition, burying their dead. The comms tower lay broken, its twisted skeleton clawing at the sky like a warning. Becky sat apart, her back against a ruined wall, rifle across her knees. Her fingers turned the brass cartridge over and over, the words etched into its side, cutting deeper every time she read them. Shoot in the space between heartbeats. She didn't know if they were her salvation or her curse. His voice broke the silence. "Morgan, with me." She rose, joints aching, exhaustion weighing her down. Inside the dim command tent, Wilson waited too, arms crossed, his eyes harder than she had ever seen them, pointed to the map spread across the table. "They'll strike again," he said. "Not in days, in hours. They've crippled our comms, burned our trucks, tested our perimeter. The next attack isn't harassment, it's annihilation." Wilson leaned forward. "We need full withdrawal before they finish the job." Shook his head. "Isn't coming fast enough, and if we run, we hand them this region. Crimson Crown wins." Silence pressed heavy. Becky felt their eyes on her, always on her. "What do you expect me to do?" she asked softly. His gaze was sharp, unflinching. "Be who you already are, the medic who keeps men alive, the sniper who ends the fight before it begins, both, together." Her chest tightened. "Every shot I take, I lose another piece of myself." "Then lose it," said quietly, "because if you don't, we all lose everything." She wanted to scream, to tell him she was done being their answer, their weapon, their myth. But Wilson's eyes cut into hers, not demanding now, not accusing, just searching. And behind his silence she saw it, faith, fragile, reluctant, but faith nonetheless. She clenched the cartridge, closed her eyes, and let Harold's voice settle in her memory. Protect, don't destroy. Maybe protecting sometimes meant destroying. The alarm split the morning. Crimson Crown was here. The ridges around the outpost lit with muzzle flashes, mortars whistling through the air. The ground shook with the first impacts. Dust rained from every wall. Becky grabbed her rifle, sprinting to the perimeter. Operators scrambled to firing positions. Wilson barked orders, his voice steady even as chaos erupted. They came in waves, disciplined, unrelenting. Not like raiders, like soldiers. Becky's scope swept across them, each breath measured, each trigger squeeze exact. She dropped them one by one, her rifle singing the song she swore she'd never play again. But for everyone she cut down, two more pressed forward. The outpost roared with fire and screams. A mortar slammed into the medical tent. Becky's heart seized. She sprinted through the smoke, dragging the wounded out, hands moving on autopilot, tourniquet pressure, morphine. Her rifle lay slung across her back, its weight pressing like judgment. Another explosion. Another scream. She was pulled back and forth, healer and killer, until the line blurred to nothing. Then Wilson's voice cracked over comms. They're breaching the east wall. Becky dropped the bandages, sprinted to the breach. Through the haze she saw them, Crimson Crown fighters pouring through the shattered wire. At their center, a man taller than the rest, moving with deliberate calm. The leader. Her scope found him, but something inside her froze. He didn't flinch under fire, didn't duck. His eyes seemed to look straight through the chaos, straight at her. The cartridge burned against her chest. She exhaled, squeezed, and the leader snapped a hostage in front of him. An American operator, bound, beaten, dragged from the shadows. Becky's bullet would have cut through both. Her hands shook. The Morgan eye steadied, but her heart rebelled. The leader raised his weapon, pressing it to the hostage's head. His voice carried even through the smoke. Come, Morgan, or he dies. Time slowed. The battlefield faded to a heartbeat. Becky lowered the rifle, dropped it to the dirt, stepped into the open. Shouts erupted behind her. Wilson's voice raw with fury. Becky, no. But she kept walking, step after step, dust rising at her heels, her hands empty. The leader's gaze never left her. His hostage trembled, eyes wide with terror. When she was close enough, the leader smiled. Bloodhawk's legacy, Harold's shadow, I've waited a long time for this. Her throat tightened. Then let him go. This is between you and me. The leader's smile widened. So noble, so predictable, just like your grandfather, and just as doomed. The gun shifted, pressing harder against the hostage's temple. Becky's pulse hammered. She remembered Harold's words again. Protect, don't destroy. But sometimes, protecting meant something else entirely. Her hand slipped to the sidearm holstered at her thigh, smooth, silent. The leader didn't see it until it was too late. She drew and fired in one motion. The round tore through his shoulder. He staggered, dropping the hostage. The man scrambled free, collapsing behind cover. Chaos erupted. Crimson Crown fighters surged forward, their formation breaking. Operators roared in response, pouring fire into the breach. Becky snatched up her rifle, rolled into cover, scope up. The leader staggered back, clutching his wound, but his eyes still locked on hers with hatred that burned hotter than the flames around them. She fired again. He vanished into the smoke. The battle raged for what felt like hours. Every shot, every bandage, every scream blurred into a single, endless moment. Becky fought until her body ached, until her hands bled, until there was nothing left but the will to stand. And then silence. The smoke cleared. The breach was sealed with bodies. Crimson Crown was gone, melting back into the mountains. The outpost stood, battered but alive. Men staggered, wounded but breathing. Wilson leaned against the ruined wall, sweat and soot streaking his face, stood in the center, grim but steady. Becky lowered her rifle. Her arms shook with exhaustion. Her eyes burned with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. Wilson approached slowly. For once, no suspicion in his gaze, only something softer, something like respect. "You saved him," he said quietly. Becky swallowed. "I almost destroyed him too." "You didn't," Wilson said. "You chose." Her chest ached. She looked down at the cartridge, its words etched into her soul. She had shot in the space between heartbeats, but this time she hadn't just taken life. She had spared it. His voice carried across the wreckage. "This fight isn't over. Crimson Crown will come again, but tonight we held." Men murmured agreement, weary but proud. Becky closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it all. The healer, the sniper, the promise, the betrayal, the survival. And in the stillness after the storm, a truth finally settled inside her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.